Before I begin, I'd like to make a note. Much of this video will have footage from the trial with me narrating over it. The reason being is the lack of pictures and photos surrounding this incident. In addition, many of the clips from the trial have terrible audio. At times, there was even audio which somehow was being picked up from another room and is being played underneath. I now know that whilst this trial was running, someone somewhere nearby was watching a comedy special. So for the most part, this episode will run more like a podcast, rather than being a display of media and imagery. Let's start, shall we? Radu Muntean moved to the United States from Romania with only $100 in his pocket to make a new life for himself. In 2004, he marries a woman by the name of Natalia, and together they start a family, living in Hazel Park, Michigan, having a daughter around 2014. According to both of them, their relationship had begun to severely deteriorate during the year 2008, and by 2016, although the two were still married, they had separated and were living in different houses that were within walking distance of one another. Both of these people shared custody of their child. When they separated, they had agreed that seeing other people would be okay, as long as they didn't bring those people around their daughter. In early 2016, Radu and Natalia had decided to try get back together and to work on their relationship once more. They were attempting to reconcile for the sake of their daughter and to be a family once more. Throughout the period of time that saw their relationship deteriorate, from 2008 to 2015, Natalia was seeking treatment for a range of problems linked to her mental health. There are a number of official documents which indicate Natalia was seeking help in the form of therapy and counseling. Although both parties acknowledge that these documents exist, and Natalia was seeking those treatments, the motive, reasoning, and context behind her seeking this help is disputed by both parties. For now, I'll summarize what those documented problems were, and then I'll get into the two differing stories about why she sought out this treatment. This will become a running theme in this video, facts not being argued at all, but intent and credibility is what will go under scrutiny. Natalia's mental health. As mentioned, between 2008 and 2015, there are a number of official articles and documents that are signed by Natalia, which describe her reasons for seeking therapy. They indicate that she had been suffering from major depression, antisocial personality disorder. She felt superior to others, could not be open and honest with her husband, didn't feel empathy and doesn't regret her actions. She experiences suicidal thoughts. She lies, deceives, only thinks of herself, and no longer feels as though she can care for her daughter. A week before the incident that this video is centered on, which happened in March of 2016, there is a document indicating that Natalia had been experiencing suicidal thoughts, and her depression had gotten so severe that she was seeking intensive live-in treatment in a facility far away from where she lived in Chicago. She was scheduled to be at this facility for a month, leaving on March 21st. Natalia had also signed a PTO against her parents so that they were unable to have any more communication with her or her daughter, and she had also been working on signing documents and gathering paperwork to ensure her daughter had a passport. This was done in the odd chance that something might happen to her and Radu, and their daughter would need to be sent overseas to Romania to live with Radu's family. There is one more document of interest, which is written and signed by Natalia. It reads as follows: Radu is not, and never was, an abusive husband. If anything, he is the one who promotes peaceful conflict resolution. According to Natalia, at the time of signing these documents, she did believe that she had these mental health problems, but has since come to realize that her husband for years and years had been telling her that she suffered these, to the point where she believed it. She is told by him that her inability to gain control of her mental health were the main issues that caused friction in their relationship, and ultimately were the reasons that saw their marriage break down. She says that he had convinced and essentially forced her to believe that she was the problem, and everything wrong in their relationship stemmed from her. She says he would bully, threaten, and argue with her endlessly, and the PTO she got out against her parents was his way to gain leverage. He isolated her from others and convinced her to believe that she was such an unfit parent that she even signed full custody of their child over to him in March of 2016. When they had decided to reconcile and to give their marriage another shot, Radu would tell her that she needs to address her issues properly for a relationship to work. One way to do this, seeing as psychologists and counselors wasn't working, would be to get intensive live-in treatment, and a month-long stay at a facility in Chicago was booked for March of 2016. Natalia says, over the years, she followed his emotionally abusive orders because she didn't want to anger him. She would say that being obedient was the path of least resistance, and that she wanted to work on herself to please him. She wanted the relationship to work. She wanted to get better for him and for her daughter, and she wanted to be a family again. She was certain that Radu was correct, that she was the problem, despite the fact that he was verbally abusive, physically aggressive, emotionally manipulative, and an all-round terrible person. Radu, as you might imagine, has a very different perspective on all of this. He says that Natalia was indeed a mentally troubled person, and that her state of mind interfered with their day-to-day life. She was severely depressed and incredibly unhappy a lot of the time. He says that the marriage broke down because of a deep lack of trust. He would try really hard to make it work, and always extended trust to her, but she would continuously let him down. An example of things that broke his trust would be a time when she disclosed to him that a month after they had gotten married, she no longer loved him, but had pretended to for years. This came as a complete shock to the man, and he felt betrayed. Radu claims that they wouldn't communicate properly, they wouldn't make decisions together despite him wanting to, and that everything he values in a relationship was not present on Natalia's side. He begrudgingly admits that she was abusing substances, both legal and illegal, and that it became so bad she could no longer remember conversations that they had had throughout the years. Something else that had broken his trust was after the two decided that it would be good for her to get behavioral therapy, and she was scheduled to go to an intensive 3-day program. She cancelled this right before she was set to leave, and didn't give him an explanation why she did so. This hurt Radu because he believed that she truly needed this treatment, and it would be beneficial to their family. After the two had separated and were living in different houses, he once again states that he was proven incredibly wrong for trusting her. She had always made it very clear that any woman he might be seeing must be kept away from their daughter, and because she was so hard on him regarding this rule, he thought that she was using the same standard for herself. But unfortunately, Radu would come to learn that not only was this incorrect, but Natalia had even been leaving their daughter in the care of strange men on numerous occasions. One such time being a man that had previously sexually assaulted Natalia. Furthermore, she had been using drugs in the presence of the child, cocaine, alcohol, and more. He knows these details to be true because in August of 2015, she would open up to him and show him texts and emails, all from men that he would never want to see her with. Radu says that he gives her multiple opportunities to come clean about the many manipulations she had done throughout their marriage, but each and every time she would always let him down. He goes on to explain that he and Natalia were trying really hard to get their relationship back on track. In February of 2016, after Natalia had disclosed a number of irresponsible actions she had engaged whilst in the presence of their daughter, they both agreed she should get intensive psychiatric help, which was going to be that month-long stay in Chicago. At this time as well, custody of their daughter goes to him. He says that they both agreed on this, and it was for the best to sign custody over to him. It was a joint decision, and by no means one that she was coerced into. Radu says that all he ever wanted was to build a family, and he was determined to make it work with Natalia, as long as she was committed to getting the help that she needed. To continue addressing some of the allegations thrown at him, which paint him as an emotionally manipulative bully, he claims that the reason he had gotten her to isolate herself from her family was because her father was an abusive drunk, and her mother a manipulative and controlling person. People he didn't want his daughter to be around, and people that were no good being in Natalia's life. As you can see, we have two very different opinions of character from both of these people. There is an incident which occurred March 11th, 2016, which Natalia describes. She says that Radu came to her house early in the morning as they were both going to attend one of her therapy sessions together. Whilst he's at her house, before leaving, an argument breaks out. During this heated altercation, Radu hits her repeatedly over the top of the head, the shoulders, and her legs using his fists. He also chokes her, and she recalls that it seemed as though he was being careful not to strike her in the face, or anywhere for that matter that might show a bruise. At one point, he was using his tie to hit her, and a metal bit on the end of it strikes her eye, which causes it to blacken. Despite this happening, the two still attend the therapy session, and the counselor notices this bruise. When asked what happened, initially Natalia says that she fell down some stairs whilst carrying a basket of laundry, but the counselor doesn't believe her. Radu goes to the restroom, and in this moment, the counselor hones in on Natalia and insists that she tell the truth about the bruise. Natalia comes clean and admits that Radu did hit her. When the man returns from the bathroom, the counselor immediately questions him about what happened. When she does this, she recalls Radu becoming defensive and argumentative, but he does admit to beating his wife. She asks Radu, "What's the reason for doing something like this?" He responds, "She lied to me." The counselor then says that there is no reason for ever harming another human in this way, and when questioned if he would do it again, he answers, "It depends on the lie." Natalia and Radu begin to argue about the nature of this lie, and Radu is asked to leave the room. He does so, and the counselor follows him out. As they exit the room and talk outside the presence of Natalia, Radu is frustrated and believes the counselors are not perceiving his wife correctly. He tells her that she had been lied to by Natalia many times regarding many things. When the counselor says that they can deal with the lying another time, as of right now their primary concern is Natalia's safety, Radu accuses the counselor of being aggressive and storms out of the building. The doors are locked so he cannot enter again, and the counselor goes back to talk with Natalia, who upon learning her husband had gotten frustrated and exited the premises, does not want the police to be contacted. She says calling them will get Radu in trouble, and it will only make matters worse for her. The counselor states that Natalia's hesitation to contact police, and her desire to focus on talking about her lying rather than her own safety, indicated that she is very much a victim of domestic abuse, that she has likely been attacked before, and now was buying into what she had been told by Radu, out of both self-preservation and fear. This now brings us to the date of March 21st, 2016. As you saw earlier in the video, there are undisputed facts in what is about to occur, but then we have two differing stories about how those facts came to be. So I'll go through the undisputed facts before delving into the stories of both parties. They are as follows. Natalia was scheduled to go to Chicago for her intensive month-long program on this day. Their daughter is in daycare, and it was planned she was to be there for a number of days, as Radu was going to accompany Natalia to Chicago to help her settle into the program. On the morning of the 21st, Natalia goes to Radu's house, where she consumes MDMA given to her by him. At some point, she drives with the intention of going to a hospital because her knee was swollen, but she doesn't make it there, as she feels unwell whilst driving. She contacts 911, where police take her to hospital, then to the police station to be booked for driving under the influence of drugs. Radu, along with a female friend named Alex, collect Natalia from the station at around 2 a.m. on the 22nd. On this day, Natalia at some point cancels her trip to Chicago as she didn't make it there the day before. She meets up with a friend from work. Then later in the evening, Radu picks her up from her house around 6:20 p.m. to go see their daughter in daycare. The two never make it to the daycare, and instead, about 18 hours later, Radu's truck is discovered by an off-duty police officer located in an abandoned lot in Detroit. As the officer approaches the truck, Radu walks forward and signals that he needs help. He converses with the officer and asks for gas, as his truck is empty, but the officer feels as though something is not right. Radu is handcuffed, and it is discovered that Natalia is in the passenger seat of the truck. She is barely conscious and had sustained multiple injuries, including knife wounds, gunshot wounds, severe bruising, bleeding and swelling. She's naked from the waist down and freezing cold. As mentioned, these facts you've just learned are not in dispute at all, and with that being said, let's dive into what both parties say occurred. We'll begin with Natalia. Starting on the 21st of March, she goes to Radu's house where he is hanging out with a mutual friend of theirs, a woman by the name of Alex. Alex was a person who at a time lived with the married couple when they were together, and then for a brief period alone with Radu. Neither Radu or Alex say that their relationship was ever sexual, but they are very close. Whilst Natalia is in the presence of Alex and Radu, she is encouraged to take some MDMA. She initially doesn't feel like doing this, but not wanting to cause an argument, she eventually consumes it to appease Radu. Shortly after doing so, she notices her legs swelling and requests that Radu drive her to the hospital. He declines and tells her to go alone. Natalia leaves the house and decides to go home to continue packing because she had the trip to Chicago later in the day. As she does this, the swelling in her knee gets worse and she can no longer bend it. So it's at this point she feels it's best to get to an emergency center. She starts to drive to the hospital, but on the way begins to feel numb all down her left side of her body. Having trouble breathing as well, she pulls the vehicle over on the highway and contacts 911. She's taken to hospital, discharged, and then taken to the police station. When released from the station, she contacts Radu and he agrees to come get her, but he's very angry and not happy about the situation at all. Natalia says she waits for a very long time, to the point where she has to call him again to confirm he's coming. This causes him to get even angrier. Eventually, he arrives with Alex around 2 a.m. When Radu gets there, he argues with police a little, as he believed Natalia received the wrong discharge paperwork. And as they all drive away from the station, he is paranoid that police are following him. The man hadn't slept for 4 days straight now, and was clearly feeling the effects of sleep deprivation. Because of his concern that they're being followed, he parks the vehicle at a gas station near Natalia's house, and they walk the remaining distance. At her house, he collects a bag of drugs, leaves, and walks home to his place nearby. Later on in the day, Natalia calls a male friend from work and organizes to meet up with him. This person, she says, is nothing more than a friend, and she just wanted to talk to someone about what's going on in her life. At this point, she cancels her trip to Chicago and contacts Radu regarding this. The man becomes accusatory, aggressive, demanding and controlling via both phone and email. Throughout these heated exchanges, Natalia expresses that she would like to see their daughter at daycare, and Radu eventually agrees to go with her. He arrives at her house at 6:20 p.m. to pick her up, and the two depart to see their daughter. On the way, another argument occurs regarding the male work colleague that had come to visit Natalia earlier in the day. There was a miscommunication, and Radu had thought that this friend was coming over for a work meeting, but Natalia informs him that that did not happen and she was meeting a friend from work. She is accused of having a sexual relationship with the man, and Natalia fights back, saying this is not true at all. For an unknown reason, Radu drives them to the house that they used to live in together when they were a family, and he checks the mail there. Upon checking the mailbox, he gets back into the car and appears to be incredibly agitated. The two begin arguing again, and Radu starts to talk about suicide, how this is the only way out of the situation for them both. He says that it's best if they both were to die, and proceeds to pull out a bag full of pills, which he claims are Vicodin. Natalia expresses that she doesn't want to die, and begs him not to do anything stupid, but he doesn't listen, and grabs a handful of about 15 pills, then swallows them all. The remaining pills are given to Natalia, and she holds on to them. She doesn't take any, and continues to say that she doesn't want to die, she just wants to see her daughter. Natalia tells Radu that she doesn't feel comfortable with him driving either after he had just taken so many pills, and she attempts to exit the vehicle, but he doesn't allow this. He grabs her and says that she's not going anywhere. Radu then speeds out of the driveway, and they eventually end up on a highway. They're arguing constantly at this point, and Natalia, having two phones, pulls one out which is her work device. When Radu sees this, he grabs the phone and throws it out the window. He then hits her in the face as he drives, punching her numerous times with his right hand. Natalia mentions that in between taking these hits, she felt very confused, as it seemed as though he was driving to a specific location and knew exactly where he was going. The situation gets worse, and whilst the car is moving, Radu pulls out his gun, a semi-automatic 9mm handgun which he always carries, and using Natalia's words, he wiggles it around a little in a threatening manner. Natalia remembers yelling at him, but she can't remember what she said. All she recalls is thinking, "This is so very dangerous." The gun is pointed at Natalia's legs, and when she sees this, she pushes it away. This only angers the man more, and he points it once again at her legs, this time firing around. The bullet hits her in the left calf, travels right through, and then hits her in the right leg, becoming lodged in the calf muscle there. Her ears are ringing and she can't hear anything. She's screaming but cannot hear the sound coming from her own mouth. She feels sick, and a hot burning sensation runs through both legs. The smell of the gun lingers, and as she screams, Radu doesn't stop driving. Eventually, they end up at an empty field somewhere in Detroit. She'd never seen this place before. It was desolate, an empty field with dead trees. Lots of shrubs. The cold of winter made everything look brown, and there was garbage scattered all over the place. A singular house could be seen in the distance, which was half burned down. The car comes to a stop, and things become quiet. It's dusk out, and light was escaping them. Both sit in the truck and don't talk. Radu eventually pulls his phone out, and begins to make phone calls. From what Natalia can tell, he was speaking to their friend Alex. He discusses with her that someone owes him $6,500, and she is instructed to collect that money from them. He then tells Alex that she also has to come to the location in the field that they are in to collect some extra cash that he has on him, about $2,000. Throughout this, Radu's phone runs out of battery, and he proceeds to use Natalia's second phone to speak with Alex. He sends her their location. At one point, Natalia herself speaks with Alex via phone call and text. The conversation centers around their location, and also the location of some jewelry for Alex to collect. At no point are her gunshot wounds revealed to Alex. In between these calls, Radu tells Natalia that no one ever comes to this place, and if they were to die here, no one would find them for at least a month. Natalia says she didn't call for help. She didn't ask Alex for help or try to contact 911 because she was afraid that it would make Radu even more mad. She did at one point try to exit the vehicle so that she could walk around, but she was unable to do this due to the wounds in her legs. There's blood all over the interior of the truck from both her wounds on her legs and multiple lacerations to her face. Using handcuffs, Radu shackles Natalia to the seatbelt, and it's here she mentions that she feels more afraid than she ever has before, afraid of being shot again, and afraid of never seeing her daughter if she were to die. After being handcuffed, a vehicle arrives at their location. It's pretty dark at this point, and Radu gets out and approaches it. This person turns out to be their friend Alex. Radu and Alex talk for a bit near her car, and because they were a distance away from the truck, Natalia believes that Alex was unable to see the state that she was in. When Alex leaves, Radu walks back to the truck and he is stumbling around, clearly affected by the drugs he had taken. Natalia is terrified that he may pass out and die, and then she would be stuck there, handcuffed to the vehicle, and that no one would find her until long after she passed away as well. When Radu makes it back to the car, he says, "Don't worry, I'm not going to go before you." It's after hearing this that she fully believes that her life will end on this night, and she begins to have thoughts such as, where will he shoot me? In the head? The chest? How was it going to feel? How much pain would she experience before passing away? Natalia feels defeated and hopeless. She takes the Vicodin pills that were given to her earlier and swallows a handful of them. She specifically remembers that it was at this point that she took them, because some had fallen out of the packet and scattered around, and when she consumed them, they were dirtied, but she didn't care. She claims to have done this to help ease her pain, both physical and emotional. She wanted complete numbness. They both sit in the vehicle together. Silence once more. No more arguing, and things are calm. For reasons unknown, Radu exits the vehicle and goes around to the passenger side where she sits. He opens the door and, using a pocket knife, cuts her pants away. He says to inspect the wounds to her legs. There's antiseptic spray in the side of the door, and Natalia is instructed to spray it onto her wounds. She follows orders and does this. When he returns to the driver's side and sits down, he removes the handcuffs from Natalia, and it's at this point that the two begin arguing again. During this argument, Radu lunges toward Natalia whilst brandishing the knife. She recoils backward and falls out of the open door, landing on her back on the ground. She can't move, and it's only moments before she realizes that Radu was approaching quickly. He comes rushing around from the side of the car, holding the knife. He begins swinging it at her. Natalia fights back and attempts to push him away, sustaining a stab wound to the palm of her hand. He proceeds to stab her multiple times in the legs, around where she's shot, and she also gets a stab wound up near her knee. The assault doesn't end there. He beats her over the side and top of her head with the butt of the gun, and then sits on her chest, with his knees pinning her shoulders. Both of his hands are around her neck and he's choking her. She can feel her body running out of oxygen and attempts to get him to stop, but can't. All she can seem to do is slightly move her arms from the elbow down. She's trying her best to scream, but she can't. Her back is pressed against roots from a tree by his weight, and she is in extreme agony, severe jolts of pain rushing over her entire body. She says everything hurts. Whilst this is happening, she feels her entire jaw shift unnaturally, and although this didn't hurt, she knows it's not good. Medical records indicate that her jaw had been dislocated and completely shattered at the joint. She recalls him repeatedly asking how many dicks had she seen whilst they were married, and she tries her best to answer, saying that she never saw anyone while they were together. But he doesn't believe her, and the assault continues. Eventually, Natalia lies to keep him happy and says that she saw 2 people, but when asked who they were, she admits that this was a lie because she didn't know what else to say to make him stop. This only angers the man, and he goes back to choking her. During this assault, he removes her shirt and bra, and using his knife, he runs the blade from the top of her chest down to one of her nipples, leaving a deep scar. It's here she starts to lose her memory, and says that what happens next is foggy. Her memories are broken, with gaps of nothing in between. At a point, she remembers him stopping the attack, and he looks up above the other side of the truck. Something had gotten his attention, and it's here when Natalia properly passes out. The next thing she remembers is waking up, and it's daylight. She's sitting back in the passenger seat of the truck and has a blanket over her. Looking around, she can see Radu sitting on the curb, and he's in handcuffs. Natalia passes out again, and wakes up in hospital with a detective sitting next to her. What had occurred when Natalia lost consciousness is as follows. An undercover officer was patrolling the area. The abandoned lot that they were in was known to be a hotspot for dumped stolen vehicles. As the officer drove by checking the area out, he had noticed a black truck with the door wide open parked out in the field, so he decided to investigate. He drives toward the vehicle, and upon doing so, a man approaches his undercover car. This person is Radu. Radu asks the person, who he did not know to be an officer, for some gasoline, indicating that his truck had run out and he was stranded. The officer notices in Radu's hand a gold badge, and he asks if he's with police. Radu indicates that he is, and says that he works with the Fugitive Recovery Agency. Upon hearing this, the undercover officer identifies himself and says that he too is law enforcement, working with the auto theft unit. The officer asks Radu what he's doing out here, to which Radu responds his girlfriend had been badly beaten, and he drove out here to pick her up. The officer is suspicious of the story and wants more identification. Radu goes back to his truck and comes back with a Michigan medical marijuana card. He also informs the officer that he's carrying a weapon and flashes his waistband to show the gun. The officer, highly suspicious at this point, removes the gun from Radu's possession and places him in handcuffs. He tells Radu to sit down on the sidewalk and then proceeds to walk over to the truck in the field. When he gets there, he notices a badly beaten woman in the passenger seat. She was covered with a blanket, but he could see that she didn't have pants on, as one of her legs was coming out from the side. Her face is swollen, and she has cuts all over her hands and legs, but she is awake. He asks if she is okay, and receives an incoherent response. He couldn't understand what she said. When she spoke, she was looking straight ahead and did not look at him once. The interior of the vehicle is covered in blood, from the seats to the doors, the dash and the middle console. Medics and backup are radioed in, and within minutes they arrive. Inspecting around the vehicle, the officer notices a blood trail running about 20 feet behind the vehicle, and where it leads, there are blood-soaked pants hanging on a tree. Blood-soaked underwear and bra are on the ground nearby. When going back to speak to Radu, he notices that the man's hands and clothes are also covered in dried blood. The responding medic states that when she arrived, the condition of Natalia took her breath away. She had never seen anyone in such a state. Her eye was no longer visible due to swelling, and her skin was cold to touch. It was incredibly cold that time of year, and Natalia's body temperature was 81, which is classified as hypothermic. The medic attempts to speak with Natalia and observes that she is soft-spoken, quiet, and very scared. Due to how severe her facial injuries were, it is feared that there could be a problem with her airways closing up. Although there was blood everywhere, Natalia was no longer bleeding due to how cold she was, and keeping her warm is the #1 priority. Natalia is moved to the transport emergency vehicle, and it is here that the gunshot wounds are discovered. Natalia did not say anything about those wounds. In fact, she didn't respond to many questions at all. When she spoke, she wasn't making much sense. Her wounds are extensive, gunshots to both legs, severe lacerations to her legs, head, and face, a broken jaw, and intense swelling to her face, stab wounds to her hand, legs, and knee, and a long slice wound to her chest. This was an incredibly brutal assault, one so bad that it would be, in my opinion, impossible to argue there is any sort of valid reasoning for how it happened. But Radu does have his own version of events, and I'll go through them now. Starting from the 21st again, Radu picks up Natalia from her house. He confirms that they did have an argument about the person she had met up with from work. He says that he felt hurt and lied to, that it wasn't a work meeting, and that it all goes back to this lack of trust. He didn't understand why she would need to lie to him about this. Radu claims that the argument did not touch on the issue of whether she had a sexual relationship with this man or not, and that it centered around her not being honest in general. He also confirms that at this point in time, he was extremely sleep deprived. Whilst they drive, he was feeling very depressed and had started to have suicidal thoughts, something that has happened in the past, but today was more intense than usual. He decides to discuss these thoughts with Natalia, and the possibility of them both ending their lives. This turns into a big argument, as the conversation crept into the territory of her not being responsible with their daughter, and not being honest with him. Feeling defeated and not sure what to do, Radu drives to their old family home to check the mailbox. Upon getting to the property and checking for the mail, he turns around to return to the truck, and glances over at their old neighbour's house across the street. Although the reason why is not discussed, Radu states that this house was a source of great tension between he and his wife. Now, very agitated, he gets back into the car and begins to talk about suicide again. This time though, he pulls out a bag of Vicodin pills and consumes around 15 to 17 of them, explaining to Natalia that he's going to die as he can't do this anymore. Natalia panics and tries to get him to stop, but his thoughts are racing around how hopeless the situation is. He's tried to get help from numerous agencies, treatment for her, counselling, but nothing works. She never gets better. He felt like he failed his daughter, failed his whole family, and ending his life was all that was left. Natalia says to him she wants nothing to do with this, and opens the car door to step out. Radu claims that he didn't restrain her in any way, but instead he pleads with her to get back into the vehicle. She agrees, and when she closes the door, it's at this point her exact words to him are, "Okay, I'll take some. I want to go too." He interprets this as she agreed to end her life with him, and he watches her consume a number of the pills. They drive away from the house, and both agree that it's not a good idea for their daughter to see them in this condition, so he proceeds to drive around aimlessly. As this happens, the two begin arguing once more, and things become hectic. Through this argument, he punches her in the face a number of times. He doesn't remember how many it was, or where he hit her, because he was keeping his eyes on the road. It's here that Radu says her jaw must have dislocated from one of these hits, but he was unaware that that had happened. He also admits that he brandishes his gun, but the purpose of this was to shoot himself. He did not point it at Natalia at all. What happened for her to receive the wounds was he had turned the gun on himself, and he holds it against his temple. The car is swerving left and right, in and out of lanes, and Natalia is yelling at him. She reaches for the gun to pull it away, and he says he believes she does this for the sole purpose of self-preservation. She didn't want him to die whilst driving at speed on the highway, because that would have been bad for her. And so using both of her hands, she forces the gun away from his head. As she does this, the car swerves erratically, and then he recalls the sound of a gunshot. Radu states that he didn't intend for her to get shot, and he never pulled the trigger, but what likely happened was that his finger was on it, and as she struggled to stop him from shooting himself, she pressed his finger and it fired, the bullet getting her in the legs. He says that confusion was high, and all he could hear was ringing in his ear. At the time, he had no idea she was injured, and he is panicking beyond belief. Radu needs to find somewhere quiet, secluded, to calm himself and gather his thoughts, to figure out what he should do next. After a few minutes, he spots the abandoned field and pulls off the highway. It's isolated enough for him to calm down and to compose himself. It's now getting dark. After parking, he realizes his wife had been shot in the legs. He feels ill. It was his weapon that she had been hurt with. He's in a complete state of panic and confusion and doesn't know what to do. His father was a medic, and he himself had some medical knowledge. After a few moments, he gathers himself and decides to tend to her wounds. Radu makes his way over to the passenger side of the truck, and using a knife, he removes her bloodied pants, all the while desperately hoping that the wound was nothing more than a scratch where the bullet grazed her leg. Unfortunately, it's not a scratch at all, but a bit of good news was that the wound was no longer bleeding. Grateful that it appears she wasn't losing blood at an alarming rate, he deems the situation not an emergency and decides not to contact 911 yet. Instead, he applies antiseptic wipes and spray to her wounds, treating the injury. Whilst tending to her wounds, he admits that he did lose his temper again, and during this process, he strikes her with his gun, but not in the head. It's at this point that Radu believes his wife is very unpredictable. She had grabbed at his gun earlier in the car, and as a result, sustained a gunshot wound. He felt scared for his safety, and with both of their protection in mind, he handcuffs her to the seatbelt. A bit of a side point. When asked why did he own these handcuffs, Radu claims that he uses them for sexual activity. Now, the man sits back in the driver's seat to compose himself once more. As he does this, he releases Natalia from the handcuffs. Over a period of time following this, he claims that Natalia was not being held against her will at all, to the point where she even exited the vehicle and walked around the truck. He didn't question what she was doing, or try to get her to come back in. At no point was she being held against her own will. Time passes, and Radu's mind turns again to ending his life. He thinks the Vicodin is kicking in, and he passes out for a little. When he wakes up, he decides that before he dies, he would like to get some affairs in order for his daughter. This is where he and Natalia contact their friend Alex. Both of them speak with her at different points, and instruct Alex to come collect money for their daughter, and the jewelry from locations provided by Natalia. Radu says that he trusts Alex with this task, as she was someone he felt very close to. She'd always been open and honest with him, and has a huge heart, something he very much values in people. Alex shows up at the parking lot, and for a brief moment, I'll direct the story to Alex's recollection of what happened when she arrived. Alex says that during her time living with both Natalia and Radu, and then Radu on his own, she saw their marriage completely fall apart. In her opinion, this was because of dishonesty on Natalia's part and frustration on Radu's. On the day of the incident, when Alex receives the phone call around 8 p.m. to meet them in the empty lot, she did indeed speak to Natalia and was given instructions to collect jewelry and a wedding ring to give to their daughter. She was also meant to collect money from Radu when she arrived. She gets there, and Radu walks up to greet her at her vehicle. She doesn't get close to the parked truck in the field, but can see a silhouette of Natalia in there, who is using her phone light to reach for something in the back seat. Alex isn't alarmed that anything is wrong, or that Natalia is injured in any way. Trying to piece together what's going on out here, she asks Radu for information. Radu informs her that he couldn't do this anymore and wants to die. Alex attempts to approach the truck to speak with Natalia, but she is instructed by Radu not to go near it. She does as he says, collects the money and leaves the location. When asked why she didn't contact authorities, she states that she believed this to be another cry wolf moment. She had experienced situations like this before with those two, had many personal conversations with Natalia regarding suicide, and described the experience of knowing them both as an emotional roller coaster. Quite frankly, she didn't believe anything bad would happen, and that this would be just another argumentative incident in the long-growing list of arguments and strange incidents that occur between Radu and Natalia. Other than Radu appearing like he might have taken some drugs like cocaine or MDMA, she doesn't notice anything else out of the ordinary. He didn't have blood on his hands or clothes. In general, Alex personally didn't believe that Natalia was the victim of domestic abuse, but she does recall two instances that could raise an eyebrow. One time where Natalia had asked her questions about how to cover up bruises, seeing as Alex was a makeup artist, and another time when she saw Radu shove Natalia out of a doorway after his wife had been banging on it endlessly whilst he tried to sleep. She states that on that night, when she was out in the field, she truly didn't believe that Natalia was in any sort of danger, so she takes the money and leaves the lot. Going back to Radu's story now. Sometime after Alex leaves, he comes to the conclusion that killing themselves is no longer a good option, and he tries to start the truck, but it is out of gas. He goes to the road to seek help, and after unsuccessfully flagging one vehicle down, he strikes luck with a second. This vehicle approaches, and as you heard earlier, it turns out to be the undercover officer. You know the rest of the story from here. Natalia is in hospital for a week following the incident. Initially, when talking to police, she tells them that she doesn't want to press charges. It's all a big misunderstanding, and she blamed herself for what had happened. All of it was her fault. She felt as though, by not getting him in trouble here, it would show Radu that she really was willing to work on their marriage and get back together. But her mind begins to change, and before long she says that she realized what happened was incredibly wrong. Not wanting her daughter to ever grow up thinking that this sort of behavior is okay, she decides to press charges. Radu is arrested, and later that year goes to trial with these charges laid against him: assault with intent to do great bodily harm, unlawful imprisonment, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, aggravated domestic violence, torture, and assault with intent to commit murder. The trial would see presented to the jury a large amount of evidence ranging from phone records that displayed the back and forth conversations between Natalia's phone and Alex's, photographs of the scene, the location of the truck, bloodied clothes, weapons, and Natalia's injuries. Medical staff testified to the state of Natalia when they found her, and that she was so cold her body temperature was more of a critical concern to them than her wounds. They believe she would have died out there had she stayed in that condition for much longer. An officer who transported Radu from the scene to the police station recalls his demeanor as being strange, emotionless, and arrogant. A surgeon testified to the state of Natalia's jaw and how brutal the break was, how they were unsure whether it needed surgery or not. Items from the scene were brought out for the jury to see, clothing, weapons, and more, and the psychologist took to the stand to give her recollection of her interactions with both Natalia and Radu, as she provided therapy for Natalia's depression and more. What the state and defense both agree on is that the trial really boils down to Natalia's testimony versus Radu's. Who do you believe? The defense team argued that he never intended to harm her, let alone murder her, and the whole incident was a terrible night that spun out of control. Throughout the trial, they attack the credibility of Natalia and argue that she is a proven liar, specifically highlighting the fact that when she first spoke to detectives, and for a week after the incident, she refused to press charges and said the entire thing was one big misunderstanding. By her own words, she lied to detectives, and the defense presses her. Should the jury believe you then or now? How do they know when you are and aren't lying?
Symptoms currently: lying, deceiving, manipulating. Her handwriting, her signature. Problems you are experiencing currently. There's a box to check currently or in the past. Thoughts of suicide. The box is checked. Currently. Concerns between you and your loved one. Cannot be open and honest. I think I'm superior and manipulating. I don't feel empathy or regret for my actions. Always think only of myself. Lying, deceiving. Concerns between you and your children. I don't love her. I don't want the responsibility anymore. Manor prosecutor indicated his intent was to manipulate her, keep her from her family, control her, I believe was the word used. Father. She describes strong, alcoholic, reliable. Mother. Dependent, overprotective, and manipulative. These are the people that allegedly Mr. Montine was trying to control through his daughter. Now, frankly, this is a woman that the impression I got was very independent, strong-willed, significantly educated, and had achieved a lot in her life. So, my client, as a construction worker who came to this country, as he said, with $100 in his pocket, doesn't have that educational background. He testified to that as well. And I wrote this down, that obviously this is a fractured, dysfunctional relationship and marriage that was fueled by all the worst possible things: mental illness, drug abuse, feelings of failure. On both parts, we heard that. We were sitting in the same courtroom, we heard that testimony. And I just find it unfathomable that someone can say every part of that marriage, whether it be treating with several mental health practitioners, dealing with their child, dealing with family and relatives, every single negative thing that happened was based on trying to keep this man happy.
Radu is portrayed as a loving family man by them, one who did everything that he could to hold the marriage together and get his wife help. They say that it's unfair for the state to argue that all of the issues Natalia was struggling with was his doing, him manipulating her into believing these problems existed when they didn't, and that the marriage was built upon a shaky foundation of Natalia trying to please Radu. They also argue that portraying Natalia as a textbook domestic violence victim is incorrect.
And one thing I'd like to make absolutely clear, I think it is offensive and insulting to have a characterization of the typical domestic violent victim, that this is the way that they respond. That's insulting. You're telling me there's not plenty of men or women that are victims of domestic violence that don't get up that very minute, call a lawyer, start divorce proceedings? They always follow a certain pattern. We know that's not true. You can't say it's typical, because it's not.
The defense go into detail about how she was never held against her will, always had access to a phone where she could have called 911, and didn't even attempt to get the attention of Alex for some help when she was at the field collecting money. To build on this, they say that most of her injuries were sustained from the beating she took whilst the vehicle was in motion on the highway. And to explain that blood trail behind the truck, they put forward the idea that Natalia was on her menstrual cycle, and because she was freely walking around the truck with no pants on, well, that's how that happened. Radu is portrayed as someone who tried to render her aid, and at no point did he do anything beyond beating her up a bit. It's put forward that Natalia was indeed suicidal, a drug user, mentally unstable, and very much wanted to end her own life that night. They didn't explicitly state it, but they did imply that a lot of her injuries could have been self-inflicted. They argue that there was no forensic testing done on the gun, not for DNA or even fingerprints. So how are we to believe her story that she was struck in the head with it? Shouldn't the gun have been tested for her blood? Had she been hit with it numerous times, causing severe damage?
There's a gun with no prints, no blood, no hair, but he beat me about the head several times. I will concede this right now. Of all these counts, aggravated assault is what happened that evening. No man should ever do that to a woman. He's the first one that admitted that, how he felt about that, the shame that he felt, the guilt that he felt. He realizes that. That's what happened in this case. He beat her. He beat her. If you really look at the elements of this offense, you will see that this is the proper decision to be made in this case. Aggravated domestic violence.
And ultimately, they argue that if Radu truly wanted to kill her, he had 17 uninterrupted hours to do so, but he didn't.
If his intention was to murder her or continue to beat her and mentally destroy her over the course of the 17 hours, he sure as heck had the opportunity and would not let her go wandering off on numerous occasions. He wouldn't, this doesn't make sense. He wouldn't leave her with a phone where he testifies, she testifies, she's texting, she's calling. These aren't things that I'm trying to convince you of. These are things that were testified to. It's a matter of record. We'll certainly concede that this is a heinous, aggravated form of domestic violence that went way too far. But being that it went way too far does not mean he should be convicted of these offenses where those elements were not met and not testified to.
The state, on the other hand, argues that Radu is the one who cannot be believed, as his story makes no sense. They say the holes in his side of the story are endless, and I'll summarize a few of them now. How did Radu not think this was an emergency? There was blood all over his car. If that's not an emergency, they're unsure what is. And why did he not contact 911 once he had composed himself and collected his thoughts, or even when he had come to the conclusion that they were no longer going to end their lives? How did he think that Natalia was the unpredictable one, when by his own words, all she did to give him that fear was reaching for his gun to try and stop him from shooting himself whilst they drove at speed on a highway? Also, if he was pointing the gun at his head, does it seem believable that by her pulling his hand down, he managed to get an angle of fire that went through one calf and into the other? He had to have had the gun down low and pointed at her in a way that was intentional. Why, in all of his stories, does it seem like Natalia is the sole problem in their marriage? Everything that was bad all came from her, and he, the innocent victim that tried his best to help her through it all. Why does it seem like he's so eager to put all this blame on her for their marriage not working? And why isn't he talking about anything he might have done wrong? Also, why did he lie and say to the officer that he is with law enforcement? Why did he fib and say that he was there to pick up his beaten girlfriend? Why did he tell Alex not to go near the truck where Natalia sat? And furthermore, what was going to happen if he had received the requested gasoline to get his truck started? How come Radu's version of events doesn't account for stab wounds to the hand, knee and legs, or severe lacerations from a blunt force object to the top of her head, the deep slice wound on her chest, the countless bruises all over her body? How and why did all of her clothes get removed, including underwear and bra? And the argument about her being on her period causing the blood trail is so ridiculous to the prosecutor that she barely expresses anything more to the jury than a single, confused line addressing it, to indicate to them how laughably absurd she finds this explanation.
And I'm not going to dignify with much of a response the argument that that blood trail in the field could have been from Natalia's menstrual cycle. I think using your common sense and your personal experience, you know that that's outlandish.
Why were there clumps of Natalia's hair found out in the field? If they both intended to die, why clean her wounds? Why is Natalia the only one who was beaten, shot, and bruised so severely that she can't recall parts of the night? The questions go on, but I'll stop there, as they were the main ones that stood out to me. The state argues that everything in this situation screams textbook domestic violence. Natalia being isolated from her family, her being forced to get treatment for issues that he's made her believe she suffers from, the coercion which saw her sign custody of her child over to him, the encouragement to continue abusing substances, and then criticizing her for this behavior, her trying to please and appease him, saying that injuries sustained are due to miscommunications and are her fault, and how she didn't want him to get in trouble, as it would only make things worse. They say that Natalia had been accused over and over of being a liar and deceitful, but look who else lies. Radu lied multiple times throughout this incident, and a big point of contention was the field that they ended up in. How did he know to take her there? And it seemed awfully eyebrow-raising that on the very day Natalia was meant to be going away for a month, they ended up at a field where she could have died, and potentially no one would have found her body for a while. It is the state's belief that he was going to kill her and dump her body here at a time where no one would question her disappearance, at least for a little while. We see them say that this man wanted to hurt her, take away her freedom, both physical and mental, and assaulted her with the intent to murder. Natalia believed that she was going to die that night, and if it weren't for the officer stumbling across them, she would have. If not directly by his hand, indeed by the hypothermia and extreme cold condition that she was found in. But either way, it was Radu's intention that Natalia would not be leaving that field alive. After deliberation, the jury finds Radu guilty on all charges except for assault with intent to murder, and he is sentenced to 15 to 25 years in prison. At his sentencing hearing, he would plead to the judge for leniency, and when he's done, the judge would have a message for the man.
Anything from the defense? Sir, is there anything from the defense?
I haven't had the chance to say this yet because I wasn't allowed to, but I'd like to ask for forgiveness from my wife. I know I've treated her bad in the previous months before this event, and I'd like to beg for leniency from the court. The biggest victim in this case is actually my daughter. She lose a father if I'll be gone for a long time, and she deserves to have a father.
It's your fault.
It is.
It's your fault.
It is.
What you did is one of the most mean and evil and bizarre things I've ever seen a human being do to another human being. This is the mother of your child, and you would do that to her.
I wouldn't have done it.
You're evil. You are an evil, evil person. I can't imagine anyone doing this. Anyone. Tortured her all that time. Just evil and mean.
It's at this point of the video that I've moved away from court documents and research, and now speak from my own thoughts and opinions regarding the case. I'm going to make it pretty clear right off the bat. With this case, I absolutely do not believe Radu's version of events in the slightest. It's outright ridiculous in my opinion. There is one detail that I didn't see the prosecution go into that I'll highlight now. If Natalia's jaw were shattered in the vehicle like Radu says, shattered so severely that the bones were overlapping each other, then how on earth did she manage to have these casual conversations with Alex, pain-free? Conversations so normal that Alex didn't notice a thing. This injury must have been sustained after Alex had left, which again, just adds to the growing list of things that destroys Radu's story. That detail, along with the many others highlighted in the prosecutor's closing statements, all I can say once again is that I'm fully with the state on this one. What Radu's testimony sounded like to me was the words of an incredibly manipulative and dangerous man, one who was trying to reason to a jury that what happened was somehow understandable. He's likely been explaining his terrible behavior to his wife for so many years that he forgot how nonsensical he sounds. And being on stand with his atrocious behavior laid out, he was now tasked with the incredibly difficult job of making it look reasonable. People like this aren't used to having what happens behind closed doors being viewed by more people than the ones they abuse. This is how they operate. They hurt and inflict suffering when no one is looking, and when caught out, they explain it all away very rationally, putting on a show of emotional fragility whilst they weave a tale of personal sacrifice and hardship. Well, Radu, in this case, it appeared to me that your ability to worm out of the heat was not up to the enormous challenge of meeting your horrible actions. To me, it all came together to make him look like the grimy monster I believe him to be. I imagine that when someone rules over their world with an iron fist, like how Radu did, it could become easy for him to lose sight of reality, and how people not existing in his domain might react to such abhorrent behavior. He was forced into a corner by the legal system, and he did what all of these creeps do. He tried to convince normal, rational people that what he did was understandable. I'm glad the jury saw through it. Quite frankly, I'd be concerned for humanity if they didn't. What really turned my stomach about his demeanor was this image he tried to convey of a loving husband. He had a little handcrafted item that was pinned to his suit, more than likely something made by his daughter. And throughout the days of court, he held photos of he and his wife when they were together, a happy family, attempting to display to the jury this image of a loving husband who all he ever wanted was his family to get back together, and that it was his wife who lied and cheated constantly, forcing him into a corner where suicide was the only option. Poor Radu, hey? I don't buy it. Life is so simple when people just listen to you, said every abusive manipulator ever. I can't imagine what his wife went through, not only on that night, but for the years and years leading up to it. He broke her down mentally, then physically, and attempted to exhibit a form of control that I regard as one of the most ugly brands of it. I wholeheartedly believe that Natalia was on course to die that night. He was going to torture and abuse her until she breathed her last breath. 17 hours of this she endured. When was he planning on ending it? Sure, he may say that he was stranded there because the truck ran out of gas. But Natalia's phone didn't run out of battery, a fact that he was well aware of. Where were the phone calls to their friend Alex to come pick them up at the very least? Let alone 911. I ask again, when and how was this thing going to end in his mind? I won't harp on for much longer about this, because frankly there's not much more for me to say. I've made it clear how I feel. I do know the comment sections in these videos can get a little wild sometimes, and I fully expect there to be that odd person who will say something along the lines of, "But she was a terrible mother, a drug user, a liar." And to you, I respond in advance. Maybe those things are true, and if they are the case, how can one even begin to rationalize that any of those things require torture to the point of near death? She was manipulated and abused, And like many documented domestic abuse cases, a person will often turn to abusing substances to numb the physical and, more importantly, emotional pain. How can one hope to be a shining example of a person with perfect mental health, let alone a perfect mother, whilst carrying the burden of appeasing a beast? In these situations, one must often lie to learn to minimize aggression. They can become sneaky to live a somewhat normal existence, to hang out with people that make them feel something that isn't horrible, and they appease, surrender, and submit in the face of violence, both mental and physical, in the hopes that one day things will get better for both them and any children or dependents they may have. This is not an easy situation for the victim. The argument of, why don't they just leave, is not so simple, even though on paper it may seem like it is. One has to keep in mind that constructed around the victim is a mental prison, shackles designed to contain and control them. And just like a physical prison keeps one confined to a certain space, so too do mental prisons. This I see present around Natalia, and unfortunately for her, death was likely going to be her only escape from this hell. She was both very lucky and unlucky. Should this not have happened in the way it did, she probably would have suffered many more years of emotional turmoil to this man. If for whatever reason Natalia or her daughter are watching this, I truly hope you are both happy and living healthy lives now. I know I'm nothing more than some random internet man who makes videos, but I get invested in these cases, and in these people. And you are one of the lucky victims that I've done a video on. Lucky in the sense that you've survived. You get to continue living your life. And from the bottom of my heart, I hope that life has gotten better. In the description of this video, I've left a link to a website that has resources for helping victims of domestic violence around the world. I know it's difficult, but please, I urge you, if you or anyone you know is suffering this kind of hell, please find a way to seek help.